Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. And by God, thank you for being with us on this somber and special day. I have to say, and we've had this experience, before. We've been on the air, I think, once before on 9/11 years ago. This remembrance has been going on so long that we have cycled through it landing on a Saturday multiple times. That's kind of indicative of how far removed and yet still how fresh a lot of this stuff is. And I got to be like completely honest. It is hard for me when this kind of thing comes up to sort of arrange in my head how to do the show, how to address this, because on the one hand, a true remembrance has value, and it is good to remember not only the victims of that day, and if you've watched any of the reading of the victims' names this morning, I literally turned it on for all of 30 seconds before I started tearing up, because they have the victims' family members reading in alphabetical order, reading a section of the names, ending usually on their relative before moving on to the next family. And they have, the switchover is so fast. I feel like they have multiple podiums. I haven't seen a wide shot of I didn't get a chance to see a wide shot of what they're doing, but it seems like they just pick up right away, because it would take forever in a lot of ways. And then what struck me while they were reading this, and just one of the, and I'm gonna trigger myself, but one of the, when I first turned it on, it was a girl and her sister reading ultimately what led up to their father's name. And she's pregnant with what would have been his grandchild. And you could see them holding it together, but barely. And it's just there's a bittersweet to it, because they've got this new life coming into their world, while saying goodbye to their dad. And then the one detail that strikes me, I think, most about 9/11, besides the obvious involvement of the Saudi royal family, we'll get to that, because some of the information that Trump, I guess technically they didn't intend to do this, but they released some of the information through lazy redaction that brings it even closer to tying it to the House of Saud and all that. The Biden administration, specifically Joe Biden, wants to declassify even more stuff coming from there. That in doing that, that's one of the details that is going to start, after 20 years, really coming out. And after the death of Jamal Khashoggi, no one's surprised, but also I think there's a renewed interest in recognizing the sort of humanitarian failings, let's just say, of that particular government in the world, which will be, I think, a large part of the next 20 years of remembrance, as the Saudis, quite frankly, run out of money, and oil becomes less important to the world, and we have to, we as a government, and as a country, don't have to play as much footsie in the world to keep our lights on. And that's been a part of our domestic and foreign policy for the last 50 years, specifically because of that. This awareness that they could at any time choke off our ability to function has made us look past a lot of the more horrifying things in the world. In the same way, I would argue that we have looked past many of the atrocities in China because we needed the production. And as COVID has moved production to parallel countries in the region, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Taiwan again, and South Korea, and out of China, and as China continues to shun, the West, this giant picture, any democracy essentially, that in their shunning of that, we're becoming more emboldened, I think, to speak openly as a country about their shortcomings in a way that they just did not have sort of a stranglehold on us to some degree. And we had to trade off. Do we, millions out of work, or speak honestly about these people? And that has been a balancing act in the State Department and in our governing principles for decades because of that. And it's not just business interests versus reality. It is American jobs, American taxpayers' worth, and healthcare, and all these other things that are tied up in our economy, tied up in our ability. Ambulances still run on gas. This is a reality that the American system recognizes. And as we get further from that, it will be interesting to see this. But one of the other things, I think the primary detail that I think, I don't know how to put it, like affects me every year when this comes around, is that there are somewhere in the order of 1,100 9/11 dead that are still, their remains are still unaccounted for because they I think the New York Times has it listed at 1106 currently, because they have continued, because of DNA technology getting better over the last 20 years, to be able to tell. And you were talking about human beings who were effectively pulverized in their death, just beyond measure. And in rubble that was, much of it was, there was just nowhere to put it all. So they just scooped a lot of it up to get as much of it out of there, because it was also, we talk about and we will discuss that today, the sort of toxic air around New York. We'll understand that the concrete and asbestos and all the stuff that was in the buildings that fell was in and of itself, puffing toxins into the air by sitting there in the wind, the longer you let it stay. So there was this movement to go, as bad as the air drifting through the city was just from the actual fall, that stuff sitting there with rain and wind and weather affecting it, it could have a very drastic effect on the health of all New Yorkers. And with the removal of it as fast as they possibly could, and the recognition of that danger, so with it went the remains, all but minuscule amounts of well over 1,200 of the people killed that were not identified directly. And for those families, watching and waiting, there's just a level of heartbreak as they know that their family member worked there. They know that their family member was there. But they have no remains to bury, because they were on the 23rd floor of a gigantic office building that collapsed centrally into there. Johnny, we can hear you, right? Can you say hi? Make sure that, yeah, okay. So they should be able to hear you out in the interwebs. We're streaming, of course, at infotainmentwars.com, and of course at fwank.com, FWANQ, on Twitch, twitch.tv/HalSparks, where, if you are the college kid that's still living in your house, yes, can subscribe. Yes, nice. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. That's sweet. We will, talk. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to take calls, but not until after. We have My Hero Power coming on at the mid-mark. And I think it's kind of, they support the station, they support the show in Chicago. But also, what led us into this situation was our reliance on fossil fuels. I see. Oh, I know what it is. Gotcha. Yeah. So the idea, within, I beg your pardon. I fixed it, guys. You should be able to hear Johnny now. Thank you.
It's always been about oil.
Yeah. So the reality that we deal with in looking back on this is is that this is what this was the sort of the price that came due in our reliance on fossil fuel and our its singular stranglehold on our economy, on our way of life, and not just us. There's a lot of American focused energy on this stuff, but the entire world jumped on the petroleum bandwagon very early on without any knowledge of the danger that would come. It took us a while even to get lead out of gasoline. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. And like I said, I want to discuss a little bit about where we go from here and what the lesson of this time is in terms of the ultimate lesson in many ways of 9/11 is that renewables and getting as far away from a resource-based economy as possible will be the defining change in international relations and
Without
this
question.
kind of thing happening. And I think philosophically that's the thing we also need to never forget. We'll be back right after this.
Attention.
It's great for a somber day like today.
Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Now let's get back with Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
And we'll be right back.
I always jump the gun, and like they're so long, I always think they're done, and then they're not. Hi, everybody in the chat room, and thank you for joining us at infotainmentwars.com and, of course, at fwank.com, on YouTube, on Twitch, if you're on Twitter. If you follow me at Hal Sparks, you can watch it there as well. If you want, you can watch on Facebook at the Hal Sparks page. There's a little at the Hal Sparks page. That's how they do it now. Like I guess Facebook has fallen into that. The one thing I want to make, like really the point of discussing it today is because we'll talk about, there's no way to get around in the discussion of today and people replaying the video and all that. And we all remember where we were, and we'll talk in the next hour about our own personal memories of that day a little bit, and, perhaps intermingled with some of the folks, And to me, though, while it's interesting and while it does provide a personal connection to that day in many ways, the same way, people of the generation before talk about the Kennedy assassination or things like that. The reality is in never forgetting how this happened and, what happened, I guess, is to really remember what led up to it. That it was, and this is not in any way to forgive the actions of the people involved. In my estimation, it was an act of absolute evil. There is no excuse for killing innocent people to get your point across, ever, not ever. I'm against the death penalty not because some people don't deserve it in theory, but because there's a chance that an innocent person might be killed. And that is reason enough to just lock someone up and proverbially throw away the key, right? That's it. And so
It doesn't prevent anything.
No, it does not. And the worst of the worst who deserve it most of the time are the people who could care less and have no concept of life and death.
They just didn't think they'd be caught.
That's right. And the same thing applies, I would argue, to the hijackers and the people that supported them and the people that, caused those deaths on that day, or any act of terrorism that leads to a death. You always think, well, it's, I'm doing this to show off my fealty to whatever cause, whatever leader, whatever psychopathy that I actually have. So, but the one thing I do want to really make the point about in our never forgetting 9/11 is never forgetting that this is in fact related to blowback from our involvement in these countries being so deeply involved in the oil trade. If indeed all these attackers had come from Afghanistan or had come from Iraq at all and not been financially supported by the Saudis and had been related to a bunch of intermingled back and forth between us and the Cold War between Russia and all this, none of this would matter. The Russians wanting a pipeline through Afghanistan, the Europeans' need for the Nord Stream pipeline right now from Russia, the financial help that it gives to Russia and carrying out what it does, the petrochemical industry, both our use of fossil fuels to burn for to keep the engine of society running. Mixed with, of course, our need for plastics, because let's not forget how much plastic is in our world and how much of it comes from the petroleum industry. It is in many ways about to, if it has not already, overtake our need for actually burning of oil specifically, is our need for making plastics out of it. So the memory that we should have, along with those of the people who passed and the damage and the heartbreak that went with that family, to remind ourselves to never forget that, is not necessarily to go, shake our fist at the hijackers that died, or shake our fist at the people who supported them, fed them, housed them, taught them how to fly but not how to land, paid for those flight lessons, all the other stuff that goes with that led up to 9/11 in a material sense, but also our part in, as we became aware, because I'm a lot more forgiving about the early addiction to oil that America and other countries had, because quite frankly, it was simply, if you look at There Will Be Blood, from, the movie, or, if that's most people's, I think, closest idea to the sort of the oil rush, or people's view about the Beverly Hillbillies was our view of oil for a very long time. I mean, think about that this was just, oh my God, discovering oil on your land, that's fantastic. And it would lead to this. This is not a, throwing guilt or aspersion about a burgeoning economy that came out of something that fueled something in a way, literally, that most of us couldn't grasp. That you would have to, there will be energy breakthroughs in our lifetime that perhaps will equal oil, but they will come over a slow rolling period of time. If we have, thorium micronuclear reactors everywhere that don't produce weaponizable waste and have a shorter half-life for the waste they do produce, and you can bury it in the earth and it's not a concern. That will happen, but it will happen over decades, and solar panels become increasingly efficient to the point where you'll just paint them onto your car, and the car's sitting in the sun during the day. The damage that will be done to that is parking garages, because nobody wants to park on the roof right now. Then everybody will want to park on the roof. The best parking space in a parking garage right now is on the first floor. It will be the top floor at some point because of that, right? That every house will be built with paint on solar panels, or, and a white roof. I cannot tell you, folks, whatever you can do to lighten the color of your roof helps. It's nearly as good as planting 5 trees. Because it reflects light the way snow and ice does. I don't know why anyone in Phoenix or Las Vegas or Tucson or anywhere in Texas doesn't have a white roof. It boggles my mind. So, that said, nothing was a force accelerator on an economy that, by the way, led us to less than 1 billion people alive on the whole planet to nearly 7 billion people alive on the whole planet, because now you could feed them. You can get food to places where there is no food, with vehicles that are on tires that roll out into the middle of someplace because they're powered by a gas engine, in a way that laying train tracks would never have been practicable. That building a runway and flying stuff in short distance to a bunch of places, or having enough helicopters in the air to short run food and the like. Trucking and cars have not only saved billions of lives, but created billions of lives. And so our addiction to oil, which gets written off as this kind of like our grandparents and our parents should have known. should have known that this was going to be poisonous later. I got news for you, kids. Everything was poisonous when they were alive. Everything. The Industrial Revolution, living anywhere for very long, living downstream from someplace and not understanding, geothermal shifts. Everything was toxic.
Seen pictures of the old major league teams. All those guys are like 22 years old, and they look like they're 45.
Exactly. Look at I used to have that joke about the Dust Bowl, and you'd have this 15-year-old, this 17-year-old dude and his 15-year-old wife and their two 13-year-old kids, and everybody looks 90. If you think they should have known what this was going to lead to, go look at the Dust Bowl, because that was an instant view of what people understood about the land. They killed the topsoil, the wind came and blew it all away, and it was poverty writ large. People were going to farm their own land. They were going to make their own food. It was a hippie paradise in a lot of ways. It was the early hippie paradise, and it failed miserably because people didn't understand. They didn't have a deep understanding that most farmers who'd worked for generations on stuff did. We got to take a break. When we come back, Ty from My Hero Power is going to be on with us, and we'll discuss a little bit about, it's a nice lead in about how we can you have the opportunity right now to shift. I'm trying to make this as little a sales pitch as I can, because it's not. It really isn't.
Right.
This is something you can do right now to tip that direction if indeed it's not available in your area. We'll talk to him after we come back, and then we'll, because that to me is the theme of today. How do we get away from fossil fuels in as fast as possible, reclaim the environment, make life safer and healthier for everybody? We'll be back right after this.